How do you react when your own daughter-in-law stands up at your son's farewell and gives you 30 days to leave the house you built? How do you stay calm, pack a single bag, walk away in silence, and let the paper trail speak later? This is how I went from the old man on the couch to the man who decided who actually stayed in that house. Before we dive deeper into this story, I have one small request. Please subscribe, drop a like, comment, and hit that hype button to boost this channel so more people can discover these incredible stories. My name is Henry, and when my story began that night, I thought I was only going to a nice farewell dinner for my son. The restaurant was one of those modern places with soft yellow lights and fake plants on every wall. They had pushed tables together in the back room, and there were balloons and a banner with my son's name on it. People were laughing, taking pictures, lifting glasses. It should have been a happy night. I sat near the edge of the room. That is where I usually sit now, a little out of the way, close to the wall. From there, I could see everyone without being in the middle of things. My daughter-in-law, Chloe, moved from group to group, touching arms, smiling, telling stories. She had chosen a tight dress that made all the young ones say she looked like a movie star. My son, Daniel, stood beside her with his arm around her, looking proud and tired at the same time. People came over to me now and then. One of Daniel's friends patted my shoulder and told me I must be proud. A younger cousin asked me how it felt to have my son going overseas. I said I was happy for him and that he had worked hard. Most of the time, though, they forgot I was there. It did not surprise me. That had been happening for a while. I watched them bring out the food. I watched the drinks move around the room. I saw Sabrina, Chloe's mother, at the center of a group at the bar, talking with a loud voice. She kept looking my way and then back at them, as if she was sharing a secret joke. Several of them turned their heads toward me and then back to her. They smiled in that tight way that says they do not want to be seen laughing. I tried to ignore it. I told myself it was in my head. For years I had tried to give everyone the benefit of the doubt. That was my habit. My late wife used to say I always looked for the good in people. Sometimes I think that habit did more harm than good. After dinner, they dimmed the lights a little and started the speeches. People moved closer together. A few of the younger guests lifted their phones and started recording. That is normal now. Every family moment is content. Daniel spoke first. He thanked the company that was sending him overseas. He talked about new chances, adventure, growth. He thanked Chloe for supporting him. He said he would miss his family. When he said the word family, he waved a hand toward the whole room, not at anyone in particular. I did not take that as an insult. I knew he was nervous. Then Chloe took the floor. She did not even wait to be invited. She stepped forward like it was her stage. Everyone quieted down right away. She had that kind of presence, that strong front. She told a story about how they met, another about a mistake he made early in his career and how she fixed his resume. People laughed at that. She liked to present herself as the one who shaped him. After that, she turned the speech toward their life at home. She spoke about the house I built with my own hands, beam by beam, with my wife at my side. She called it their home. She did not mention me when she said that. She talked about their future renovations. She said they would finally make it the way they wanted. She described white walls, an island in the kitchen, a home office, a bigger nursery for my grandson, Leo. I was still fine at that point. It hurt a little, because she spoke as if my late wife and I had never lived there, but I told myself that young people talk like that. They say our, theirs. They forget what came before. Then Chloe raised her glass. Her eyes swept the room and then settled on me. Her smile stretched wider. She spoke loudly so the phones would catch every word. She told everyone that as part of this new chapter, they were taking a big step. She said the young family needed their own space. She said that I, her father-in-law, would be moving out of the house within 30 days. She said it like it was a kind act. She said it would be better for me, that I would find a place suited for my age, somewhere quiet. She painted a picture of a small apartment or some kind of senior unit where I could play cards all day. She said this was already decided and that everyone should support me in this transition. People laughed at first, then grew quiet when they realized I was still sitting there. I watched their faces change as they turned to look at me. Some looked sorry, some looked away. Sabrina smiled proudly, as if this was her idea too. A cousin tried to meet my eyes, but then stared down at his plate. Phones were still up. That detail burned into my mind. The red recording dots, tiny and bright. I did not stand up. I did not shout. I did not ask her what she thought she was doing. I just sat there with my hands on my knees and listened. In that moment, I understood something important. This was not a slip of the tongue or a private talk gone wrong. She wanted this announcement to be public. She wanted everyone to know I was leaving the house. She wanted to fix the story in people's minds. The young couple taking over, the old man moving out. Daniel came over after the speeches. He avoided obvious eye contact. He said he hoped I was not upset. He said it was for the best, that he and Chloe had talked about it a long time, that they needed space to be a young couple and raise Leo. He said they would help me find a place. He said we could talk about it more later, after the party, after his flight. He did not ask if I agreed. He spoke as if it was already settled. I told him I understood that night was about him and I would not make a scene. I said we would talk. That was all. For the rest of the evening, I wandered around the edges. A few people came up with those small, careful smiles people use when they feel guilty but do not want to get involved. One guest told me I was very generous to give them the house. That was the first time I realized what Chloe had been saying about me behind my back. Another guest said he hoped I would enjoy my new place and that downsizing was good for older people. I just nodded and thanked them. When the party ended, I hugged Daniel. I held him longer than usual. I think he smelled of cologne and excitement. He said he needed me to be supportive and not stress Chloe. He looked like a boy for a second, not a grown man, and then he was gone again, pulled back into the crowd. The next morning, I went with him to the airport. The sky was pale and gray. The terminal smelled of coffee and metal and long trips. We sat near the gate. He talked about visas, about the company flat, about new tools he would learn. He did not talk about the house or the 30 days. At the final call, he hugged me and thanked me for being understanding. That was the phrase he used. He asked me again not to make it hard on Chloe while he was away. He said he would call as soon as he landed. He walked toward the gate, turned once, lifted a hand, and then he was gone. I drove back to the house from the airport. My hands were steady on the wheel. I had not slept much, but a strange calm sat in my chest. It felt like a cold, clear lake. When I unlocked the front door, the house smelled different. There was a new candle burning on the hall table, something sweet and sharp. Chloe was not there. She had taken Leo to preschool and gone to work. The place was quiet. I went straight to the garage. The garage had always been my space. The walls were lined with tools. The workbench still had marks from when I measured and cut the wood for the house frames. In one corner, there were boxes with my late wife's things that Chloe never got around to sorting yet. I had built a small shelf of toys for Leo there, too. I stood in the center and turned in a slow circle. The house outside belonged to their taste now. Gray walls, big TV, trendy furniture. But the skeleton under it all was still mine. I remembered how my wife and I had done the first coat of paint, how we argued and laughed over floor tiles, how proud we were when we moved in. I understood something else in that moment. They were not only pushing me out of a place to sleep, they were writing me out of the story of this home. I did not want to beg to stay in my own house. I pulled out an old travel bag from the shelf. It had dust on the zipper. I wiped it with my hand and opened it on the bench. I packed simple things, a few shirts, some underwear, my toothbrush, my shaving kit, my glasses case. Then I took down one small photo frame from the wall, the one with my wife's face on the day we finished the roof. She had paint on her cheek and such a bright smile. I wrapped it in a towel and put it in the bag. I took my small toolbox too. Not the full set, just the basics. Even now, I cannot feel right in a place without a few tools nearby. I left my heavier things on the shelves. On a hook by the door hung the spare house keys. I had put that hook in myself years ago. I took my keys off the ring and placed them on the little dish under the hook. The empty ring looked strange in my hand. Then I closed the garage door behind me and walked down the driveway with my bag over my shoulder. I did not leave a note. I did not send a message. I simply left. I checked into a cheap roadside motel outside town. The room smelled of cleaning spray and old smoke, but it was quiet. The bed was stiff. The curtains did not close all the way. I set my bag on the chair, put the framed photo on the small table, and sat on the edge of the bed. All night, I lay there and watched the patterns on the ceiling. I replayed Chloe's words in my head. I saw her face at the restaurant, the way she enjoyed saying I had 30 days. I saw Daniel's tired eyes at the airport. I heard again the way people spoke to me, as if my life was already decided. By morning, the hurt had cooled, and something else took its place. It was not rage. It was something heavier and more solid. A decision, still without a clear shape. The light through the thin curtains turned from dark gray to pale blue. I sat up, rubbed my eyes, and reached for the cup of motel coffee I had made from the little sachet. It tasted like hot dust, but it woke me. That was when my phone buzzed on the table. I picked it up and saw a message from Paul, my old friend and lawyer. He said he was standing at my front door. He wrote that Chloe had just opened it and that her face had changed when she saw who he was. He added one short line. He thought it was time we all had a very honest talk about the house. I stared at the screen for a long moment. the motel room silent around me, and knew that the 30 days she had given me were not going to work out the way she thought. I did not answer Paul right away. I sat there in the motel room with the phone in my hand and let his message sink in. He was at my door, talking to Chloe, and I was not there. For the first time, that fact did not make me feel guilty. It only made things clearer. I wrote back with a short message. I told him that I was not at the house, that I had moved out the day before, and that I was at a motel for now. I asked him to tell me later how the talk with Chloe went. He replied that he would fill me in and that we needed to go over some old papers as soon as possible. Then I put the phone down and looked around the room. The motel was quiet in the early morning. I could hear a vacuum cleaner somewhere down the hall and a truck on the road outside. The little photo of my wife stood on the table, crooked in its frame. I straightened it with my hand. I told myself this would not be the place I stayed. It was just a pause. By noon, I had found something better. An old neighbor, Mr. Grant, had a small studio over his garage. I had helped him fix his roof years ago, and we had stayed friendly since then. When I called him and explained that I needed a place for a while, he was surprised and angry on my behalf. He asked what had happened with Daniel and Chloe. I kept my answer simple. I said things were tense and I did not want to cause a fight in front of my grandson. He told me I could have the studio that same day for a low rent. He said it was nothing compared to all the times I had helped him in the past. I thanked him and drove over with my single bag and my toolbox. The studio was small, just one room with a narrow bed, a table, a cupboard, and a tiny kitchenette. The ceiling sloped, and there was a window looking out over the street. It did not smell like anyone else. That part I liked. Mr. Grant helped me carry my things up the stairs and then left me alone, after saying that his wife would bring me a warm meal later. I put my bag on the bed and set my wife's photo on the table again. Then I sat down and let my mind walk backward over the last few years. When my wife died, the house felt too big for me alone. Every room echoed. I could not sleep in our bedroom for a long time, so I moved to the small guest room. Daniel and Chloe had just gotten married then. They were living in a cramped apartment with thin walls and a leaking sink. When Daniel told me that the rent was high and that they were trying to save, I made the offer myself. I remember that night clearly. We were sitting at the old kitchen table. Daniel had brought over some cheap takeout. Chloe had looked around the house with wide eyes and said the light in the living room was perfect. I told them that if they wanted, they could move in with me for a couple of years. I told them they could save for their own place and also help keep the house lively. At first, Chloe was almost too polite. She asked if I was sure. She said she did not want to invade my space. She called it my house. She said my name with a kind voice. Daniel hugged me and said I was helping them more than I knew. I thought it would be a good thing. In the beginning, it was. They moved into the master bedroom. I stayed in the smaller room down the hall. I could hear them laughing and watching shows late at night. The house filled with music and the noise of young life. On weekends, we cooked together. Chloe liked to experiment with recipes she saw online. I washed dishes and listened. Sometimes they brought friends over for dinner. I did the grilling outside. Back then, when people arrived, they would say the house looked solid and warm, and Daniel would tell them proudly that his father had built it. But little by little, the balance shifted. It started with small changes. Chloe asked if she could paint the walls in the living room. She said the beige color felt old. I agreed, as long as she did not mind if I helped with the work. She laughed and said there was no need, that she and Daniel would handle it. They painted the walls a flat gray while I was away on a fishing trip. When I came back, my wife's framed embroidery was in a box in the garage. Chloe said she wanted a more modern style, and that she would hang the older things somewhere else later. Then she began talking about the house in a different way. To her friends, she would say they were living in their place, not my place. She told people she was working on her home. When she posted pictures online, she never mentioned that the house belonged to me and my late wife. She called it her project. At first, I told myself it was just words. It did not cost me anything to let her feel comfortable. After Leo was born, everything tightened. Babies change houses. I understood that. I was happy to build a small changing table for them and to fix the squeaky door to his room. The sound of a baby in the house gave me some peace. My wife had not lived to see him. It made me feel closer to her somehow. Chloe, though, started treating me more like a piece of old furniture. She set rules about where I could keep my shoes, where my mail could sit, how long my tools could stay on the kitchen counter if I was fixing something. She said this in a joking tone when others were around, but the rules were real. Once, during a family dinner, she told everyone that I was her third child. She said I was like an extra kid she had to manage. People laughed. She mimicked my habit of leaving my reading glasses in different rooms. She described it like a silly game. I smiled, but something inside me shrank. Daniel never pushed back. When I asked him later if the jokes bothered him, he said Chloe did not mean them and that this was just her humor. He told me not to be sensitive. Soon, she began to clean out my wife's things. She said she needed space. She called the boxes clutter. She did not say my wife's name very often. I found a small carved jewelry box in a donation bag once. When I held it up and asked what it was doing there, Chloe said she thought it was old and that I would not mind. I told her that box was from our first anniversary and that I minded very much. She shrugged and said she had not known. The more I saw, the more I realized that she did not see the house as something she had joined. She saw it as something she had taken over. People in our circle started repeating her language. At a barbecue, a neighbor complimented Chloe on her house. She did not correct them. She simply described the new sofa and the curtains she planned to buy. When I mentioned that I had built the house myself after my wedding, the neighbor looked surprised. He said he had not known that. He said he thought Chloe and Daniel had bought it. I laughed it off, but later, alone in the garage, I felt something like a slow ache in my chest. I usually went to the park when the house felt too full of her voice. There was a bench by a small pond where ducks gathered. I would sit there and watch the water. Sometimes I talked with another older woman, Mrs. Patel, who walked the same route every morning. She was a widow too. We shared simple small talk, the weather, the ducks, the noise of the city. She once told me she had moved in with her son for a while and then moved out again when she realized she was treated like a guest in her own story. On the day after I moved into Mr. Grant's studio, I went back to that bench. The air was cool. My mind still felt thick from lack of sleep, but I knew I needed fresh air. Mrs. Patel was already there, feeding breadcrumbs to the ducks. When she saw me, she greeted me and asked if I was all right. She said she had heard things from Sabrina at the community market. I asked what she meant. She said that Sabrina had been talking proudly about how the young couple were finally taking over the house and that I was moving out soon. She said it as if I had been a long-term guest. Mrs. Patel said she had not liked the tone. She thought it sounded like people who wanted the benefits of the older generation, but none of the respect. Hearing it put that plainly made my stomach turn. I realized that Chloe and Sabrina had not only planned the speech at the restaurant, they had been laying the ground in other people's minds for a long time. To them, the idea that I was leaving was not shocking. It was the final step in a story they had already written. I sat with Mrs. Patel for a while. A little boy nearby pointed at my small suitcase by the bench and asked his mother why that grandpa was sitting alone with a suitcase. His voice was loud and clear. The mother hushed him and pulled him closer, but the words echoed in my head. A grandpa sitting alone with a suitcase. That was how I looked to strangers now. I pulled out my phone, more from habit than intent. At that moment, a notification appeared on the screen. It was a calendar alert I did not remember setting. It showed a meeting with Paul at his office. The note I had added under it months before said something short about housing and trust. I stared at those words and felt the cold, clear feeling in my chest sharpen. I had set that reminder a long time ago, after my wife and I signed the trust documents. We had meant to review them with Paul every few years, but had never done it after she died. The alert had bounced around my calendar, moved forward, delayed, ignored, until now. Now it blinked at me like a small red eye. I dismissed the alert and then reopened it, as if I did not trust my own eyes. The time was set for the next afternoon at Paul's office. I had the address, the note, everything. For the first time since Chloe's speech, I did not feel like the person being moved from place to place. I felt like someone being called to his own desk. I pressed my thumb to the screen and confirmed that I was going. Then I sat back on the bench, with Mrs. Patel and the ducks and the sounds of the park around me, and let a new thought settle. Maybe the story of the house was not as fixed as Chloe believed. The next afternoon, I took a bus to Paul's office. I could have driven, but I did not feel like going back to the house area yet. The bus was slow and crowded. I sat near the window and watched the city move past. People held shopping bags, briefcases, phones. Everyone was busy with their own small problems. No one knew that, for me, a whole history was sliding out from under my feet. Paul's office was on the third floor of an older building in the center. The hallway smelled of paper and coffee. His nameplate was still the same one he had when my wife and I first went there many years ago. Back then, we were younger, and we thought planning ahead would protect us from everything. We were wrong, but we were not completely wrong. When I opened his door, Paul stood up from behind his desk. He looked older, too, more gray around the temples, but his eyes were the same, sharp and kind. He came around the desk and shook my hand with both of his. He said he had been worried when he saw I was not at the house that morning. He told me, in a calm, careful voice, what had happened when Chloe opened the door. She had smiled at first, then tried to act relaxed when he introduced himself. She had told him I was in the process of moving out, as if it were all arranged. She hinted that I wanted to sign transfer papers soon so the house would be officially theirs before Daniel left. Paul said he had listened without arguing. He had not corrected her about who owned the house. He had simply told her that any talk about property needed to happen with me present. According to him, that was when her tone changed. She had said I could be confused about legal things, that it might be better if she and Daniel handled it. He had replied that, as my lawyer, he was required to speak to me first. Hearing that made something inside my chest go tight, but it did not surprise me. It was exactly the way I had seen her steer other conversations, just in a new place. I sat down in the chair opposite Paul's desk. He asked where I was staying. I told him about the studio over Mr. Grant's garage. He nodded and said it was good I had a roof that was my own, even if it was small. Then he pulled out a thick file from his cabinet. It had my name on the tab and a date from many years ago. He laid it on the desk between us and rested his hand on it. He reminded me of the day my wife and I had first come to see him about the house. Back then, Daniel was still in school. We had wanted to make sure that if one of us died, the other would be safe, and that the house would be handled the way we wanted when we were both gone. We had talked for hours, and then Paul had helped us set up a trust and a will. I remembered the long meeting. I remembered signing papers. I also remembered that, after my wife died, I did not come back to review anything. It hurt too much to look at those documents alone. Paul admitted that he had sent reminders over the years, which I had ignored. I apologized for that. He waved a hand and said it was normal. People do not like to think about the end. But he also said something else. The structure we set up back then was still in place. The land, the house, all of it was still under my control through the trust. I blinked at him. In my head, I had always half believed that by letting Daniel and Chloe live there rent-free and by letting them change things, I had somehow given the house away already. Hearing that the law did not see it that way made me feel both foolish and relieved. Paul said he would not go through every detail that day. He knew I was tired, but he wanted me to understand the basics. The trust named me as the person in charge while I was alive. It had instructions for what would happen after my death. Those instructions were based on assumptions that my family would remain close and respectful. There were also, he said, some conditions about what could be done if those assumptions were broken. When he said that, I felt a chill. I asked what he meant. He did not answer right away. He just tapped the file with one finger. He said there were clauses we had put in with careful language about how I could change the plan if I was mistreated or pushed out by family members in a serious public way. At the time, my wife had insisted. She had seen stories about older parents left in the cold after giving everything away. She had wanted to protect us from that. I tried to remember that meeting. I could see my wife's face in my mind, serious and determined. She had always been kinder than I was, but she also saw danger sooner. I realized I had trusted her on that day, and then, in my grief, forgotten what she had done for us. I reached out and touched the edge of the file. I wanted to open it right then and read every line. Paul stopped me gently. He said there was no rush to read the legal words. He promised to send me a summary by email later, in plain language, so I could think clearly before deciding anything. He did not want me to make big choices based only on anger. I sat back and listened. For the first time since Chloe's speech, I felt like I was not floating. There was ground under my feet again, even if I did not know its full shape. We spoke for a while about practical things. He asked if Daniel knew about the trust and the conditions. I told him Daniel knew the house was in my name, but I doubted he remembered the details. He had been young when we signed the papers, more interested in his own life than in legal planning. I had not brought it up again because I did not want him to feel like I did not trust him. Paul nodded slowly. He said that silence was understandable, but it also meant that other people, like Chloe, had been free to build their own story about the house without any facts in the way. Before I left, Paul gave me homework. He told me to start writing down a full timeline. When Daniel and Chloe moved in, what agreements we had, who paid for what repairs, who said what about the house in messages or emails. He said these things mattered, not just for law, but for clarity. Once I had the story on paper, I would see it more clearly myself. I left his office with a small knot of fear, but also with a new kind of strength. The file stayed on his desk. I did not carry any legal papers out with me. The only new weight I carried was in my head. Outside, the afternoon light was bright and cold. Across the street, there was a coffee shop. I went inside, ordered a plain coffee, and took a seat at a small table by the window. My hands shook a little as I set the cup down. It was not age. It was too many years of keeping quiet. I took out a fresh notebook I had bought on the way. The cover was simple and dark blue. I opened it to the first page and wrote the word house at the top. Then I started listing things. I wrote the year my wife and I bought the land. I wrote the date we moved in. I wrote the year Daniel and Chloe came. I wrote rent-free beside it. I wrote down big repairs I had paid for, the new roof, the heating system, the fence. I wrote the times Chloe had talked about her kitchen, her living room. I noted the dinner where she called me her third child, and the barbecue where the neighbor thought they had bought the house. As I wrote, more memories came back. I remembered text messages Daniel had sent me thanking me for letting them live in my house until they could save. I remembered a message from Chloe complaining about the old layout and saying she could not wait to finally make this place ours. I wrote down that these messages existed and that I needed to find them in my phone later. The words filled the pages slowly. My handwriting is not as neat as it used to be, but the act of writing settled my thoughts. It turned vague pain into clear lines. It also showed me something I had not wanted to face. This did not start with one speech at a restaurant. It had been growing for years, drop by drop. By the time my coffee was cold, several pages were full. I closed the notebook and held it between my hands. It felt like a small stone, solid and real. On my way out of the coffee shop, my phone buzzed. It was the bank. I had sent them a message earlier from Paul's office, asking for a summary of my property and mortgage history. A woman from the branch called me back. She asked some security questions, then told me, in a polite, professional tone, that the house was fully paid off and still listed under my name only. She said she could prepare certified copies of the documents for me to pick up another day. I thanked her and ended the call. Again, I walked away without any paper in my hands. But the information sat in my mind like another brick on that solid ground. That evening, back in the small studio, I laid the notebook on the table next to my wife's photo. I looked at them together, her smiling face and the blue cover with the word house on it. I wondered what she would say if she could see all this. I imagined her telling me I had waited too long to stand up for myself. I imagined her saying it was still not too late. My phone rang again. This time it was Daniel. His face filled the screen when I picked up. He was in his hotel room near the airport, getting ready for his flight the next day. His voice was cheerful on the surface, but I could hear a thin line of strain under it. He asked how I was. I said I was fine. I did not mention the studio. I did not mention Paul. Then he got to the point. He said that Chloe had told him she had found some transfer forms online and that they could go to a notary to sign them before he left. He spoke as if the only question was when I had time to do it. He said it would make things smoother for everyone and help them plan the renovations. I listened without interrupting. When he finished, I told him in a calm voice that I would not sign anything at a notary alone with Chloe. I said that any talk about the house needed to happen with Paul present. I suggested that before he flew out, we all sit together in Paul's office and go over what was real and what was not. He fell quiet for a moment. Then he said he did not want this to turn into drama, that Chloe was already stressed, that he had a lot on his mind with the move. He asked me to trust him. He said he would never do anything to hurt me. I told him I believed he did not want to hurt me, but that intentions were not enough. I repeated that I would not sign anything without my lawyer. I kept my tone level. I did not raise my voice. After a while, he sighed and agreed. He said we could talk at Paul's office after he came back for a short visit, once he had settled overseas. For now, he just wanted me to cooperate. When the call ended, I stared at the black screen for a long time. I realized that, in the past, I would have given in to his request just to keep peace. This time, I had not. It was a small change, but it felt huge inside me. Later that night, as I was washing my one coffee cup at the tiny sink, my phone buzzed again. It was an email from Paul. The subject line mentioned the trust and said he had highlighted some clauses I should pay attention to. There was a note that we would discuss them in person soon. I did not open the attachment yet. I let it sit there, a silent weight in my inbox, like a sealed envelope on a table. I wiped the cup dry, turned off the light, and lay down on the narrow bed. In the dark, the glow from my phone screen showed the subject line one more time before it dimmed. I understood that the quiet part of this story was ending. The next part would not be loud with shouting. It would be loud in a different way, in the language of dates, signatures, and the things people had never thought I would use. When I woke up the next day, the studio was full of thin white light. I lay there for a while, listening to the street. A car passing, someone calling to a dog, a garbage truck in the distance. For a moment, I felt almost peaceful. Then I remembered the email from Paul and the notebook on the table, and the weight of everything came back. I sat up, made myself coffee on the small stove, and opened my laptop. The email from Paul sat near the top of my inbox. I clicked it and saw his short message. He said he had gone through the trust and will. He had made a simple explanation of the parts that mattered right now. He told me to read it slowly and to ask questions later. I read his summary. I will not repeat the legal language here. It was not magic, it was not dramatic, it was clear. It said, in plain words, that while I was alive, I was the one who decided what happened with the house. It said that the plans for after my death could be changed by me under certain conditions. It said those conditions had to do with how I was treated by the people who expected to benefit. I read it twice. Each time I felt more stupid for forgetting what my wife and I had set up, and more grateful that she had pushed for it. When I finished, I closed the laptop and put both hands flat on the table. For years, I had acted like someone who had already given everything away. Now I saw that on paper, at least, I had not. The next step was to match the paper to the real life. That afternoon, I went to the bank branch in the center of town. The building was glass and metal, bright and shiny. Inside, a woman at the reception desk asked how she could help. I told her I had spoken with someone about getting copies of my property records. She checked her screen and then asked me to wait a moment. After a short time, a manager came out to meet me. He led me into a small office with glass walls and a desk, the same kind of office where I had sat with my wife many years before. He asked me some security questions again. Then he opened a file on his computer and told me what he saw. He said that the mortgage on the house had been paid off for several years. He said there had been no new loans against it since then. He said that the title was still in my name, as it had been from the start. He spoke in a calm, professional tone, like he was reading a weather report. For him, this was just data. For me, each line felt like another piece of solid ground. He asked if I wanted printed and stamped copies. I said yes. He told me it would take a little time, and that I could come back for them later. I did not ask to see the pages then. I did not want to stand in that glass room staring at numbers and signatures. It was enough to know they existed. When I walked out into the street again, the air felt colder, but my head felt warmer. The story Chloe told at the restaurant, about me moving out so they could finally have their home, did not match what the bank knew. One story was noise, the other was paper. On my way back, I stopped at the community center. There was a lounge there that the retired group used a few times a week. I had walked past it many times, but had only gone in once or twice. That day, I went in. The room was simple. A few old couches, a coffee machine, some tables with mismatched chairs. A few people I recognized from the neighborhood were sitting together, talking. One man I knew a little, Martin, waved me over. He was in his 70s, always in a plaid shirt. He asked how I was. I gave him a short answer, something about going through changes at home. He nodded like he had heard it all before. He said he had moved in with his son and daughter-in-law for a while after his wife died. At first it was nice. Then he felt more and more like a visitor in his own life. He said there had been a day when his daughter-in-law told guests that their house was finally free of old stuff and that the grandparents now only visited by appointment. He decided after that to move out and buy a small flat with the money he still controlled. Others in the room had similar stories. Someone talked about signing over a car and then being ignored. Another spoke about paying for renovations and then being told to stay out of the new wing. The details were different, but the feeling was the same. People had treated their kindness like a weakness. I listened quietly. I did not tell my full story. I only said that my daughter-in-law had announced at a party that I would be leaving my own house within 30 days. They all winced at that. One woman said it sounded like someone who thought the elders had no power left. Martin asked if the house was still in my name. When I said yes, he smiled a tired little smile. He said that was important. He said people changed their tone fast when they realized they were not as in control as they thought. He told me to remember that I had the right to choose what happened with what I had built. His words were simple, but they matched what I had just heard from Paul and the bank. It was like hearing the same song played on different instruments. After I left the community center, I went back to the studio. On the way up the stairs, my neighbor's wife stopped me. She asked if I was settling in. She said she had seen online that Daniel and Chloe were finally getting the place to themselves. My heart dropped a little when I heard that. I asked where she had seen it. She showed me on her phone. On the screen was a photo of Chloe and Daniel in the living room. She was sitting on the arm of the couch, leaning into him, smiling. Leo was on the floor near them, playing with blocks. The caption talked about a new chapter, about a young family finally having their own space in our home. It mentioned that I would soon move out and find a place that fits his needs better. The comments under the post were full of heart emojis and people saying they were happy for them. A few people wrote that it was nice I was being so generous. Some joked about how hard it must have been for them with another adult in the house. No one asked how I felt. It hurt to see that. Not the photo itself, but the easy way the story was told. They had written me as a side character, a step in their plot. Once I was alone in the studio, I opened the same post on my own phone and took screenshots of it. I made sure the date and time were visible. I did not know exactly how I would use it, but I knew I needed to keep it. Then I opened my notebook again. On a new page, I wrote online at the top and listed the post, the caption, the comments that stood out. I added a note to check family group messages again for similar words. I realized that our entire life now had a kind of public echo. People did not just say things, they posted them. Those posts left a trail. That evening, I went back to Paul's office. He had asked me to stop by again after hearing from the bank. When I arrived, he had my file open on his desk and another, smaller stack of papers next to it. He asked me to sit and then asked how I was feeling. I told him the truth, or most of it. I said I felt tired, angry sometimes, and also strangely steady. We talked about the bank visit and the online post. I showed him the screenshots on my phone. He looked at them with his reading glasses low on his nose. He nodded and said they were useful. He asked if there had been any other public comments about me moving out. I told him what Mrs. Patel had heard from Sabrina at the market. I told him about the restaurant speech again, in more detail this time. Paul listened without interrupting. Now and then he wrote notes on a pad. When I finished, he tapped his pen against the pad and looked up. He said that what Chloe had done was not just rude, it was public. That mattered. She had not come to me alone and asked me to consider moving. She had stood in front of others and announced that I would be leaving their house within a set time. He reminded me again that in the trust there were conditions that took this kind of public disavowal into account. He did not pull out the specific clause for me to read then. He only described its purpose in simple terms. He said my wife had wanted a way to respond if we were ever treated as if we were no longer part of the family story, especially when it came to the house. He asked if I was ready to think about changing the future plans for the house and the value inside it. I did not answer right away. I looked at the window behind his desk. Outside, the light was going orange. I thought of Leo on the floor in that photo, playing with his blocks, unaware of any of this. Finally, I told Paul that I did not want to punish my grandson. I also did not want to reward people who treated me like a problem to be solved. I said that if there was a way to protect Leo while also making clear that Chloe and Sabrina could not push me out and take everything, I wanted to hear it. Paul nodded again. He said there were options. He spoke about different paths in a careful, general way. He did not lay forms in front of me yet. He said we could create a trust that would help Leo later, with rules about who could touch the money. He said we could change who would benefit from the sale of the house if it was ever sold. He said we could do this in a way that followed the law in the old documents and that honored what my wife had wanted. Respect. He ended by saying I did not have to decide everything that day. He suggested I sleep on it and that we meet once more soon with some clear steps. When I left his office, it was almost dark. I walked back to the bus stop, feeling the cold on my face. On the bus, I checked my phone again. There was a group message from Chloe. She had created an event for a Sunday lunch at the house in a week's time. The title said it was a family talk about my move-out plan and housing options. There was a smiling face emoji at the end. She had invited me, Sabrina, and a real estate agent I did not know. Daniel was listed as joining by video call from overseas. It was all organized like a work meeting. I stared at the invite for a while. Then I clicked that I would attend. Right after that, I forwarded the screenshot of the invite to Paul with a short line, that this lunch might be the right time to put everything on the table. He wrote back that he agreed and that we should be ready before then. He added that, if I wished, he could be nearby that day with the relevant papers, not in the room, but close. Back in the studio, I pinned a small paper calendar to the wall and circled the date of the lunch in red. Below it, I wrote a simple note, talk at house. I stood there for a long time, looking at that circle. It felt like a small target. I did not know exactly how I would aim yet, but I knew that was where things would shift. The days before the Sunday lunch passed slowly, but my thoughts were not slow at all. They moved like a quiet machine, steady and constant. From the outside, nothing dramatic happened. I still slept in the narrow bed in the studio. I still drank cheap coffee in the mornings. I still walked to the park sometimes and sat on the bench by the pond. But under that, pieces were moving. One morning, Mr. Grant knocked on my door. He brought up a bag of fresh rolls from the bakery and asked if I had heard anything more from Daniel or Chloe. I told him about the planned lunch. I said they wanted to talk about my move-out plan. He snorted at that. He said he hoped I was not letting them push me anywhere I did not want to go. I told him I was done being pushed. I did not try to explain more. He patted my shoulder and said I could stay in the studio as long as I needed. Later that day, I sat at the table with my notebook open. On one page, I wrote after. Under it, I listed things I actually wanted for myself once this was done. A small place of my own, space for my tools, a quiet corner for Leo when he visited, if his parents allowed it. It felt strange to think about my life as something separate from their plans, but it also felt right. In the middle of this, my phone rang. The number was from a real estate office. The woman introduced herself as Mia. She said she had received my message and that she had some time that afternoon if I wanted to meet. Her voice was calm and professional. We met at her office on the ground floor of a glass building downtown. The waiting area was full of bright pictures of houses and apartments with cheerful captions. When she came out to greet me, she looked at me for a moment and then smiled in a familiar way. She said we had met years ago on a building inspection. I remembered then. She had been new back then, following me around a half-finished apartment block while I checked the beams. She led me into a small meeting room and asked what I wanted to discuss. I told her plainly that I was thinking of selling my house. I did not mention Chloe or Daniel at first. I just described the property, the size, the area, the improvements. She listened, taking notes. Eventually, she said she thought she knew which house I meant. She asked if it was the one with the big maple tree in the front yard, near the corner. When I nodded, she said she had seen photos of it online recently. She said a young couple had posted about living there and about finally having their home to themselves. There it was again, that same story from another mouth. I told her quietly that the house belonged to me and that they were my son and daughter-in-law. I said we had some family tension, but that, on paper, I was the owner. I watched her face while I spoke. She did not argue. She did not doubt. She simply nodded and adjusted her notes, crossing out a line she had written by habit. We talked numbers for a while. She gave me a rough idea of the market value. It was higher than I expected. Years of work and careful maintenance had grown into something bigger than I had let myself see. She asked if there were any special conditions. I said there might be soon. I told her I wanted to be in control of the timing and that there were people living there now who would need notice, but that I did not want any details shared with them until I said so. She agreed. She said she would prepare basic paperwork and that we could make it active later. It was like preparing a vehicle and leaving it parked, ready to start. When I left the office, I felt a small but real shift. For the first time, I was the one starting a process about the house, not just reacting to theirs. The next day, I met Paul at a building near the courthouse. The lobby was quiet, with hard chairs and a machine that spat out numbered tickets for people waiting for different services. He waved me over and led me up a flight of stairs to a room with a long table. On the table was a stack of papers, neatly arranged, and a notary waiting with a stamp. Paul explained in simple terms that these documents did two things. They adjusted my future plans for the house and clarified who would benefit from its value, and they left me in full control of it while I was alive. He did not read each line aloud. I did not ask him to. I trusted that we were following what we had already discussed in principle. The notary checked my ID and watched me sign my name several times. Each signature felt like a quiet answer to a loud insult. The sound of the stamp pressing down on the paper was small but sharp, like a tiny hammer. When we were done, the notary left the room with the stack. Paul and I stayed behind for a moment. He told me that after these documents were filed, the story of the house would look very different on any official page. He said no one could undo this with a speech or a group chat message. On the way down the stairs, I asked Paul if he thought I was being too hard. He asked me what I would tell a client if their daughter-in-law had done what Chloe had done. I thought about that. I realized I would tell them to protect themselves and to draw clear lines. I said so. He just nodded. He did not say more. That evening, Daniel called from overseas. He had started his new job. He sounded excited and tired. He talked about the new office, the different food, the strange buses. Then, as if switching tracks, he told me that he and Chloe were making plans for after the transfer. He said they were thinking about knocking down a wall to open the kitchen. He said they wanted to build a deck in the back. He spoke as if everything was normal, as if I was packing my things in a quiet corner somewhere and getting ready to hand over keys. Part of me wanted to interrupt, to tell him exactly what I had signed that morning. Another part of me knew that the Sunday lunch was coming, and that the truth would be clearer there than over a weak video call connection, so I just listened. When he finally paused, I told him I was glad his work was going well, and that I would see him on the screen on Sunday. I said we would talk about the house properly then, with everyone present. He agreed and said he trusted me not to make it a scene. I said I trusted myself to do the right thing. When the day of the lunch finally arrived, the sky was bright but cold. I woke early in the studio. I took my time getting dressed. I chose a clean shirt, my good jacket, and the same watch my wife had given me years ago. I shaved carefully. I did not want to look like a victim walking into a trial. I wanted to look like what I was, the owner of that house and a man who had made choices. On the table, I laid out what I would bring, my notebook, now thick with notes and dates, a slim folder that Paul had prepared, sealed with my name on it. My phone, fully charged with messages and screenshots saved in a special album. I did not open the folder. I did not need to see the papers again. Just knowing they were there was enough. Before I left, I stood for a moment in front of my wife's photo. I told her quietly that I was going back to the house, but not as a guest, and not as a man begging to stay. I said I would speak plainly and then leave again on my own terms. Saying it out loud steadied me. On my way to the house, I stopped once more at the park. The ducks were out. Mrs. Patel was there again, in her long coat. She asked where I was headed. I told her there was a family lunch and that some truths would be spoken. She wished me strength and said sometimes the most polite voice can deliver the hardest blow. When I turned onto my old street, my heart beat faster, but my steps did not slow. The maple tree in front of the house had lost most of its leaves. The driveway had 2 cars in it, Chloe's and another I recognized from the real estate office. Mia was there already. As I walked up the path, my phone buzzed. It was a message from Paul. He wrote that he was parked around the corner, that he had extra copies of everything, and that I only had to text if I needed him to step in. I wrote back that having him nearby was enough. I reached the gate and put my hand on it. Through the windows, I could see shapes moving in the living room, hear bursts of laughter. I took a deep breath, opened the gate, and stepped onto the path toward my own front door. Chloe opened the door before I could press the bell. She wore a bright sweater and a fixed smile. For a second, her eyes showed real surprise that I was right on time and standing tall. Then she slipped into her usual tone. She said it was good I could make it, and that everyone was already here. She did not step aside like a host welcoming an owner. She stepped aside like someone allowing a visitor inside. I walked into the hallway. The smell of a new candle hit me again, something sweet and sharp. My old coat rack was gone. There was a sleek metal one in its place. My shoes had always sat in a basket by the door. That basket was not there anymore. In the living room, Sabrina sat on the couch with a folder on her lap. The real estate agent, Mia, stood near the window, looking at some printed pages. Leo was on the floor with his cars, making little engine sounds. When he saw me, he ran over and hugged my leg. He asked if I was coming to live in his room now. The adults went quiet for a second. Chloe told him in a light voice that Grandpa was just visiting. On the coffee table was a laptop, open and connected to a video call. Daniel's face filled the screen. He smiled when he saw me and said it was good to see me. His voice came through the speakers and filled the room. I noticed his eyes flick to the sides as if checking Chloe's expression off-screen. Chloe clapped her hands once and told everyone they should sit so they could go through things. She took the chair closest to the laptop. Sabrina moved to the other armchair. I sat at the end of the couch, with Leo pressed against my side for a few moments before being called back to his toys. Mia stayed by the window, a little apart from the family cluster, her folder held to her chest. Chloe began talking. She said she knew the last few days had been emotional. She said change was hard. Then she repeated the same lines she had used at the restaurant, but in a softer voice, that a young family needed their own space, that a big house was too much for one older man, that it was best for everyone if I moved into something more suitable within 30 days. She glanced at Mia and said they had asked a professional to join them so they could plan the transfer of the house properly. She spoke as if this were a thoughtful gift to me. I let her finish. I did not interrupt. When she paused and looked at me, I thanked her for arranging a lunch so we could all talk together. Then I said that, before we discussed my move, we needed to make sure we all understood whose house we were in. The room shifted then. Sabrina's mouth tightened. Daniel looked confused, then worried. Chloe tilted her head and asked what I meant. She said everyone knew this was our family home now. I reached into my bag and took out my phone first, not the folder. I asked Daniel if he remembered the farewell dinner at the restaurant. He said, of course. I asked if he remembered the speech where Chloe had given me 30 days to move out. His face changed. He said he knew it had upset me, and that Chloe had already said she was sorry if it came out wrong. I said I was glad he remembered, because other people remembered too. I tapped the screen and played an audio clip. The sound of clinking glasses filled the room, then Chloe's own voice, clear and full of confidence, giving me 30 days to leave their house, so the young family could finally have it to themselves. No one spoke while the recording played. When it ended, Leo asked why his mom's voice was coming from my phone. Chloe said it was nothing and reached out as if to take the phone, but I put it back in my pocket. I said that speech was not a private misunderstanding. It was a public statement. I said it matched what she had written in the family group chat and online, that I was moving out, that this was her and Daniel's house now. I looked at Mia then and said even the realtor had seen that story. Chloe's smile was gone by then. She said I was twisting things. She said she only meant it as a celebration of their new stage. Sabrina added that modern families did things differently now, and that I should be proud to give my house to my son. I nodded slowly and said I had heard that argument many times. Then I told them that before my wife and I ever brought Daniel to this house, we had gone to a lawyer and set up a trust. I said that trust kept the land and the house in my hands while I was alive, and that it included conditions about respect and how I could change my plans if I was pushed out. Daniel frowned at the screen. He asked if this meant the house was not automatically his. I answered simply that nothing in life was automatic. I said the house had always been in my name, that the bank still showed only me as owner, and that letting them live there without rent had not changed that. Chloe tried to object. She said I had promised them the house many times. I asked her to name one time she had a message or paper where I had done that. She could not. She said everyone had understood it that way. I replied that understanding and legal reality were not always the same. Then, and only then, I took out the sealed folder Paul had given me. I laid it on the coffee table and opened it. Inside were several documents with fresh stamps. I did not slide them around the room like dramatic props. I simply placed one page in front of me and read a short part aloud in plain words. I said the trust had been updated. I said that, because of the way I had been publicly treated and spoken about, I had used the clause my wife insisted we include. I said that Daniel and Chloe were no longer the people who would receive the value of this house when it was sold. Daniel's face went pale on the screen. Chloe told him I was bluffing. Sabrina said no judge would stand for this. I told them calmly that it was not about a judge. It was about the trust and the will, signed and witnessed, already filed. Then I placed another document on the table. I slid it toward the empty space between us. I said this was something simpler, a formal notice ending their permission to live in my house. I said it gave them 30 days to vacate, the same number of days Chloe had given me at the restaurant. Chloe stared at the paper as if it might bite her. She said they had nowhere to go. She said this was cruel. I answered that they had always had choices. They had chosen to treat me as if I did not matter. I said I would no longer live that way. Mia cleared her throat softly then. She said, in her careful professional voice, that she had been instructed by me to prepare a listing for the house. She said the timeline in the notice would allow for viewing soon after they moved out. Her words landed like another small stamp. I added one more thing. I said the house would be sold when I decided, and that the money would fund a scholarship in my wife's name and a trust for Leo. I said Leo would have support one day, no matter what story the adults told now. I also said that Chloe would not be able to touch that trust. Chloe's eyes filled with angry tears. Sabrina started talking fast about family, sacrifice, gratitude. Daniel tried to speak over both of them, saying there must be another way. I listened for a moment, then held up one hand and said I was not there to argue. I said I had spent years letting other people decide the story. This was my correction. Leo came back to my side then. He slid his small hand into mine and asked, in a soft voice, if I was going away forever. The room fell silent at that. I knelt down so we were eye level. I told him I was moving to a different house, but that I would always answer his call if he wanted to talk and if his parents allowed it. I did not look at Chloe or Daniel when I said that last part. I did not need to. Then I stood, picked up my bag, and left the documents where they were on the table. I did not take a last walk through the rooms. I did not look around like a man being sent out. I walked down the hallway, past the new coat rack, and opened the front door. Outside, the air was cool and clear. The maple tree branches moved gently. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I glanced at the screen. It was an email from Mia, sent just after she stepped outside. The first viewing for the house was already scheduled for 32 days from that day. I put the phone back in my pocket and walked down the path without looking over my shoulder.